one thing that I do admire about Arsenio is the complete conviction he has about MEPC in October. He has zero doubt about what the outcome will be. Obviously, time will tell if he's right or not. Welcome to Undocked. How you feeling, Raal?
Well, the welcome, I think the welcome is welcome to what we hope will be a soothing. This is the LISW Hangover Edition. But no, in actual fact, I'm feeling remarkably fresh for a man who got in at nearly 5 o'clock this morning. So, after
one too many banana daiquiris, was it?
No, you got the banana daiquiri reference in. Gone in early on the banana daiquiri. It's breakfast, basically, isn't it? No, we a breakfast smoothie. But we had a fantastic night, didn't we? We had a great night last night.
It was good.
Lots of
yeah,
fun.
It was
really
very
good.
fun. Thank you very much to the UK Hydrographic Office team for inviting me to their table. I had a lovely time. We went. It was the London Shipping Week gala dinner. Whose table were you on?
I was on Imarist. Thank you, Imarist, for
nice.
hosting me on your table last night. Yeah, it was really great. It was a really nice evening because actually I think for me as well, I didn't really lean into the social side of London Shipping Week. I had a bit too many things going on, and I was sort of travelling home on the train rather than sort of staying up in town and stuff. So I kind of skipped a lot of the parties and that kind of stuff. And then so last night was really the first time I'd seen quite a lot of people. And it sort of felt like everybody was it was like, how many, 2,000 people, did they say? Something like that?
Yeah, 1,700, yeah.
So yeah, it was just like, I think I just from pretty much talking for the entirety hours, and a lot of people stayed
didn't
late.
skip out on the social through the week.
Well, you're a lot younger than me, so you can get away with it. The thing about London International Shipping Week is that it's essentially made up of all these. There's sort of core central program which is run by the organisers, but then that is then augmented by any sponsor can run as many events as they want. I think, chatting to friends at Lloyd's last night, I think they did 12 events.
They really? Wow.
Yeah, in the course of the week. Obviously, it's a big organisation. They've got Safety Tech Accelerator, they've got the decarbonisation hub, so and the classification business, and then the digital business and everything. So there's a sort of diverse portfolio, but it's a good indicator. And I think Sean said last night, Sean Maloney, the co-founder, I think he said 350 or something events. So mind-boggling, right? So
yeah.
So if you were trying to get around all of those, and they're all spread all over the city of London, which is a big place if you've ever been there.
And that's the official events as well. There's all sorts of unofficial mixers and little parties and dinners that go on the fringes of it. So it's a big week.
Yeah, and I think it's you and I. I think it was you and I talking about it last night. It could have been someone else. Saying that it's probably the biggest amount of free content to access any of the shipping events in the world. There, as I said, you can't go to 350 events, but from morning to evening, I think there's, to my knowledge, apart from the main conference, I don't think any of the events are pay for events. Some are closed door and invitation only, but that's pretty amazing. The other thing to note about it is that because anyone can kind of run these events, you've got a real spread in terms of what that content contains. So you've got P&I clubs, you've got finance people, you've got training providers, you've got technology, events, you've got security related things, you've got governmental type stuff. It's really, really diverse. And because of that, if you do manage to get around, you will get a real sense. And I talked about it as being like a bellwether, one of those bellwether events where you really get a sense of
where things are at,
how the industry's thinking. Now, to caveat that, London is perhaps not the centre of the shipping world anymore. So we have to factor that in. It is typically UK-centric events, so there is that to think about. But I do think that it's still, a very good indicator of what's going on. What was your, let me ask you, Nick, what was your kind of, if you just had to sort of, pen sketch overall feeling about the event this year, what would you say?
Good question. I guess I'm slightly biased by the things that I was involved with. But if I were to try and pick, I could probably narrow it down to 3 things that kept coming up that people kept wanting to speak about. One we've spoken about a lot, that's artificial intelligence, like near enough. Didn't matter what the topic of the panel was or the topic of the conference or whatever, AI would just come up naturally in the conversation. I think it's just something that's become so pervasive everywhere, not just across the industry, but in our lives, that people can't stop talking about it. So that was one. And then the second, I think, are really sort of alternative fuels. Wind, I think the UK's role as a wind power hub is a really interesting thing that I hadn't probably given enough thought to previously, but feels like actually the cluster that the UK has around wind-assisted propulsion, and the fact that the UK, I think, is really probably becoming one of the leading exporting countries of wind propulsion, is something that I just don't think is really talked about often enough.
That's really interesting, actually. And I think one of the things, sort of, if I think about one of the themes in the course of the week, because you spend time with governmental people as well, and as well as, some of the trade associations, all the different aspects of it. The UK is sort of quietly getting some real competence on a number of fronts, or getting, it's quite weird because it sort of feels more generally, if you to ask people, I think the sort of general feeling and mood music is that everything's going wrong and, we're on a downward trajectory as a country. But there's sort of, this government is sort of quietly competent, I think. And it's sort of like, there's the AI stuff in the week, for example, Britain is being backed by organisations as well. They were seeing it as a place to invest, which is good to see, obviously. And the wind thing is interesting as well, because, that's why I say sort of quietly competent, because you're not really, maybe it's something about the British nature, not to kind of, we had too much boosterism under Boris Johnson, perhaps, and his government, that things are just sort of a bit quietly getting on with it. But I think there's been some good things happening, really.
On that, I'm not sure about the quiet competence thing, if I'm totally honest. I think you're possibly giving the government a little bit too much credit. But where the government has often fallen down in the past is that they would make a lot of big noise about funding innovation and particularly funding decarbonisation, and then follow through. Some of the early kind of clean maritime demonstration competitions, I think, were like, low tens of millions, which in reality may fund some interesting early stage innovation, but it's never going to fund anything actually sort of going through to commercial viability. Today, at that dinner, the Secretary of State announced, I don't know if they probably announced it through the week as well, it was the first I'd heard of it. DFT is putting £448 million into emission reduction technology. So that actually feels like a genuinely meaningful amount of money. And they are backing it, or that 400 million is being backed with an additional 700 million pounds in private capital as well. So the total now funding in the UK under the UK Shore programme is 1.1 billion pounds. So suddenly that now I kind of feel like, all of this stuff is just waffle until the rubber meets the road and there's actual cash at stake. And I feel like this is the first time I've seen genuine meaty financial commitment to funding innovation around decarbonisation technology. So that's quite exciting.
For me, I think I sort of like perhaps more of a kind of helicopter view. I agree with you entirely. There was definitely, AI is pervasive, but we've talked about this on this. And the reason for that is it's a bit like talking about the internet, or talking about, it's got into everything. So it's not a surprise that it's been a major theme. I think decarbonisation, again, there's no way that wouldn't be the conversation there. I think that the thing that struck me the most, and I'll credit him, Tim Wilkins of Intertank, I was talking to him, and he said there doesn't seem to be a kind of a center position anymore anywhere. People are either really positive or optimistic, or they're really negative, and like no one seems to be in the middle. And it struck me how many I would go from event to event and get these completely opposite views. And that was kind of interesting for me, that there seemed to be very, very different takes on where we are and on what's ahead and all that sort of thing. So I think that was different. And I think the other thing that struck me, because, geopolitics has been on the agenda of most of the events, as a topic, so there might be a panel on it. But again, a bit like the AI thing, it's kind of come into everything now because it's starting to kind of, I guess, it's something that everybody's got to think about and everybody's got to have some sort of, angle on. People are quite, shipping generally is keen to not get involved, right? It's a global thing. People tend to avoid talking about politics and just deal with whatever the situation they're facing. But I do think that that's a side of it now that people may not want to talk about, may want to have a dog in the fight, but they are talking about how we can, as an industry, cope with that backdrop and how we can kind of try and do what we can to react.
Someone said, I can't remember who it was yesterday, trade is often political, but shipping is not. And I thought that was quite a good summary. I feel like the shipping industry just cracks on with whatever the trade or political environment is.
Yeah.
But sometimes you can't avoid the politics, and we don't really do politics on this show, thank God. But there was a visitor to the UK this week, as well as London International Shipping Week. He wasn't here purely for London International Shipping Week, and that was Donald Trump. Was on a state visit, although I must admit, because I was so engrossed in Shipping Week, I missed any of the headlines, apart from one, which I think is worth sharing, because and I'm not sure if this was timed for Shipping Week, and if it was, then it's a stroke of brilliance on behalf of the government, but I have a feeling it's just a coincidence. There's a technology prosperity deal that's been put on the table, and there's a memorandum of understanding that talks about all sorts of things. So, for example, accelerating AI innovation, which is quite interesting. It talks about the foundations for frontier innovation, securing 6G, whatever that means. But there's a whole section on unleashing civil nuclear energy. And there's a part of that section that is particularly interesting, which I'm just going to pull up. Reading directly from the government announcement here, exploring opportunities for novel applications of advanced nuclear energy, including civil maritime applications, and playing a leading role in forming the establishment of international standards, potential establishment of a maritime shipping corridor between the participants' territories, and strengthening energy resilience from the participants' defence facilities. So my read of that is that they are effectively creating a green corridor for nuclear between the US and the UK. And there's going to be cooperation on the civil maritime elements of that, but then also the defence facilitation of that. Taking that as read, one of the issues with the current US administration is as a lot gets announced and then a lot gets also reversed. This seems to be a genuinely well thought through policy announcement that has some real detail to it compared to some of the other announcements that we've seen, particularly around trade over the last few months. So this has given me real optimism that the UK could, along with the US, become a genuine leader in civil maritime nuclear. And that we've talked about this in previous episodes, but that just opens up a whole host of really exciting growth opportunities for the entire industry.
Hence why I sort of said about this kind of quiet competence going on in the background. These are really seismic kind of things that are sort of just getting done. And nuclear was, I'm pretty sure, I didn't take as many notes as I should have done this week, but I'm pretty sure that it came up at the ABS thing, that everything else is potentially a bit of a pathway to nuclear. When we interviewed Bjorn Hillguide for a show on Wednesday, which you'll see coming up, he talks about nuclear in that same way. And then, I think it's fascinating that we could potentially be leading the way with that as a country in partnership, obviously, as you described. So that's really interesting. I think that was the other thing with the different perspectives coming in there around the people that see it as achievable. The sort of let's say the received wisdom has been ammonia, hydrogen, methanol, biofuels, the green LNG and things like that as being the kind of the thing that can be achieved along with the sort of energy saving side of it as well, versus people who are now kind of saying that all of these things really are just going to be something on the way to. Again, LNG being really backed on a couple of things that I saw people really sort of, saying that that's the answer. Because of for those that don't follow the detail on this, it's that thing of no one is really saying that LNG, fossil LNG is the fuel of, a future fuel option because it's carbon based. It's more the fact that there are options for green LNG. And the important thing, as far as the vessel is concerned, is that you can run it without modification. So,
well, and I think a big part of that is around blending fuel as well, and having, drop-in biofuel, or drop-in bio LNG, I should say. If you're the way the targets are set up and will ratchet over the next decades, is that you need, in the first instance, to be getting a kind of 5%, 10%, 15% reduction. And so it doesn't necessarily ask you to totally switch out your fuel source to be something that's entirely carbon neutral. But if you can make your LNG feedstock 20% bio LNG and 80% fossil, then you start to create a better carbon footprint kind of to begin with. That is the theory, and that is what people are interested in. There's all sorts of reasons why, all sorts of arguments you could make that go counter to that. So the first being methane slip, which is still a problem. And actually, I sat in some really interesting sessions at Lloyd's Register on as part of their safety tech accelerator. They run a program called MAMI, which is the Methane Abatement in Maritime Initiative, I think, something like that. And they've got a kind of consortium of different ship owners together to look at how you can find novel ways to reduce methane slip and ideally take it down to zero. For anyone who doesn't know, methane slip is escaped methane. So it's escaped LNG that just gets released into the atmosphere instead of being combusted. And the problem with that is that it has a much worse greenhouse effect than CO2. And so I can't remember the exact factor, but it's 20 times worse than CO2. So even if you're losing a fraction of a percentage of your methane into the atmosphere instead of combusting it, it actually has a massive impact on the overall greenhouse effect of that vessel's operation. And then the second kind of counter argument to that would be you're still burning a carbon-based fuel. Like, even if you're using renewable energy in some way or to produce the fuel, and you could argue that is net negative, you're still ending up releasing CO2 in the atmosphere in another way. So even if it nets out to zero, it's not a perfect solution. And that's exactly the same problem that methanol has as well, which is it's better, but there's still a big C in the chemical formula there.
Yeah. As we're on this subject, can I talk about one of the events I hosted?
Yeah, of course.
I sort of gave it a plug earlier. Now it's in the rearview mirror, but we did Strictly Decarb, which was a kind of take. For those that don't know, there's a show in the UK called Strictly Come Dancing, which is a very camp dance sort of show. People come out and do a dance, and then judges judge them and stuff. I think it's called Dancing with the Stars in the US, and most countries have a version of it. And this was basically this came the LISW Innovation Working Group, Decarbonisation Working Group, which I was chair. We came up with this event concept, and we had 3 people evangelizing about different levers that could be pulled to be able to do it. So the reason we did this was because a lot of the debate around new fuels and stuff like that gets a bit bogged down with things that most people have absolutely no control over, are these fuels are these things being made at scale?
Yeah.
What is the fuel that's going to be back to the future? All these kind of things.
Yeah.
Is the regulation going to do X in the future? A lot of that sort of chat, which can be quite, I don't say demoralizing, but it can be quite paralyzing, nobody's actually doing anything. So we were like, okay, let's just talk about things that we can do right now, or could be done right now. We don't, need permission, let's say, to work on them. So one was sort of hardware. So you mentioned wind assisted propulsion, or in fact, it's not just wind assisted propulsion, it's actually wind as a source of energy in some regards as well, like the rotor sails. That's what they're doing. Sort of, the bubbles across the modifications to the vessel itself that you can do. So things like Silverstream, I've given them a plug, Silverstream, putting the air bubbles across the hull, that, various little things like that can be done to get incremental gains. Then we had operational efficiency. Operational excellence. So operational excellence, which is really just about all the things that you can do in the way in which you run the vessel. So some of those are technology dependent, like planning routes and that sort of stuff. But also things like the things that the crew, for example, can do to influence it as well. So that then was followed by one which was kind of business models innovation. So this is really about the fact that we've actually, because of the way shipping business is designed, sometimes it's not in people's interest to do the thing that would be the best from an energy saving point of view. The sail fast and wait sort of idea that, you to fulfill the contract, you've got to go, rather than coming to an agreement that, you will arrive at just-in-time arrival, for example, where you could go slow steaming and therefore use less energy and stuff like that. So, and what needed to happen around there. And it was really good fun. So they kind of came out, they had 5 minutes to sort of deliver the kind of pitch, and then they had the judges would sort of interrogate them a little bit, exactly like the dance show. They would give them some sort of, some feedback and then give them a score. So they had the little scorecard panels, which came up as well. Yeah, it was really good, and it was really fast paced. Everybody did a really great job. I was really, just like sort of as a Bruce Forsyth role. I didn't really do anything constructive. I just made sure everything kind of knitted together. But
what was the thrust of each of the three arguments?
well, obviously a lot of data involved in there, showing the kind of gains that could be made, percentile gains. And that was kind of tricky for the business model one, actually. That was where, when interrogated on the data, because obviously it's really a framework that then allows the operation. The operation is really where then the savings occur. So that was perhaps a little bit harsh for that. And, so for example, John Cooper, who did the hardware for us, you put me in touch with
UK wind
John.
power success story.
Yeah. So he was obviously talking about that, and he was talking about the kind of gains that they've seen, and he was generous enough to talk about other people's solutions as well. He didn't just kind of give his own thing a plug. But that's a very compelling argument with actual data to back it up and that sort of thing. And then Øystein Jensen, who's the chief sustainability officer of Odfjell, he talked about operational excellence, and he was again able to. We talked about this in episode 1 when we would come back from Norway. So he's actually able to talk about the work that they were doing and that sort of near net zero voyage that they were able to do, which was actually through a combination of wind plow, but operational excellence, things like that. One of the things that came up in there was really interesting, because I asked them to kind of talk about, all of them to talk about, like, what's the impact, what's the feasibility, but also what's the human dimension here? What do people need to do to make this a success? And he was actually said something really interesting about how they'd actually sent their seafarers out on sail ships, learning to sail, to understand.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
Which I thought was fascinating. But one of the things that was really interesting that came up I think it came up in the Q&A, it certainly came up when I was talking to him afterwards, that they're able to do so much because they are an owner, operator, managing their own vessels, their own people, everything. Because it's end to end, they're not in a position anywhere. There's no friction in what they're doing. And that was one of the things that came up with Jan Dielman, who was one of the judges, kind of pushed into, which was to say, you doing it, it's amazing, we love it. How are you going to then, roll that out to the rest of the industry? Which then spoke very nicely, keyed into what Harris Sakrafakis of Stevenson Harwood, who was our guy with the business model thing, talking about things like Blue Visby as potential sort of solutions to this problem. But that, that then highlighted what the challenge would be to take the Odfjell model and then look to put it across the rest of the industry.
Yeah.
But the thing that I wanted to kind of sort of highlight there is the importance of innovating with these kind of event formats, because of the format. It was fun, but it wasn't irreverent. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But in changing the format, it got a completely different outcome and a different conversation. And what it really spotlighted was that we have 3 things that are actually going to work together. We put them in opposition, so there was a bit of theatre, and you could kind of, see what distinguished them. But the reality is that there's a lot that we can do that's in our power and in our control to actually, make decarbonisation work. And it's, I guess what I would say is it's the challenge. We said there were 350 events going on. I didn't go to all of them, but I'm pretty sure most of them would be a panel discussion or a presentation, maybe, a round table. But if we actually think about that and work a little bit harder, we might get some other interesting results as well. So I guess I'm blowing my own trumpet.
Michi just sat here thinking, yeah, I did 5 panels and 3 presentations in the week.
Yeah, which of course, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I'm just saying if we want to change the conversation, you've got to change the format. You've got to kind of force it. And I feel that really quite, there's a lot more we could do, all of us, me included. But I think at least I sort of tried this time.
It's an interesting thing because I think we probably often underestimate the power of events like this to drive genuine change. When done right, and that sounds like it was a good example. I'm sorry I couldn't be there. When done right, if it changes someone's thinking, broadens someone's thinking, opens them up to a new idea that they then take back into an organization that leads to a genuine action being taken on an important issue like this, then actually that's a really quite a powerful thing. And probably speaks to the power of the entire week and why weeks like this are important. I think there's a perception that these types of things are just a social occasion and a bit of a piss up, but actually there's a huge amount of sharing of knowledge that happens across. I think there were 30,000 people in London specifically for this week. And I learned a huge amount, and I'm certain that people flying in from other places around the world who are operating ships in some way, shape, or form will have taken a huge amount out of it. So yeah, kudos to you for doing something a bit different.
And the group. Øystein Jensen, operational excellence won.
Operational
represented by Øystein. He was very keen to point out that he didn't want to take personal credit for it.
But the real winner was shipping.
Didn't they do well? Somebody put that on my LinkedIn. I like that. There's a Bruce Forsyth reference. But also as well, just on that point, this thing about, I was at ABS and Chris Wernicke gave a speech that was on day one. And it was interesting. I had a chat with Gareth, and he was kind enough to procure the quote because I didn't write it down at the time. This is Gareth Lewis. Shout out to you, my friend at ABS. So the quote: maritime decarbonisation is not just about fuel, it's a 3-part calculus: 70% fuel selection, 15% energy efficiency, and 15% performance optimization. That 30% beyond fuel is where the most immediate and scalable gains can be achieved. Given the current scarcity of green and blue fuel variants globally, software is not just a tool, it is the decarbonisation fuel you can actually buy today. So
good.
Yeah, kudos to whoever wrote that one. Because I think that's, this, again, it was kind of what I was trying to do in my event as well, in kind of changing the conversation there, because we've got to start to think about that. The best fuel is the fuel we don't use, right?
Yeah, and the problem of scarcity is not going to go away. It's going to end up priced in, in 10, 15 years time. And the major issue with that is that every joule of energy that you use is going to cost significantly more. And if you're trying to operate ships on whatever the alternative fuel options, perhaps apart from nuclear, it will have to be done with a recognition that there is a genuine scarcity of that fuel. And therefore some of these alternative fuels just are not viable if you're not fully maximizing the operational efficiency. And so, yeah, I think that's, if we get that right today, it's going to make it much less painful in 10 years time when we're, trying to get it right with, methanol or ammonia. Or
hydrogen. The other thing, of course, to bear in mind here is that, the sort of history of shipping, certainly from an HFO, heavy fuel oil perspective, is we took the bit of oil that no one else wanted, the big,
it's a waste product
at the end, right? The fuels, these new fuels, are also going to be wanted by industry, by everybody, and so we kind of need to kind of back the same things because that's where the production is going to happen. But then we will also be competing for those resources.
Yeah, and when you're competing for resources, it gets reflected in price, and so it is going to be much more expensive to fuel ships in the future, no doubt.
Not just to fuel them, to operate them as well. But anyway, look, I did I've got a few other events that I was involved in, some things that I got to take away. I think I did 4. You did something crazy. How many events did you participate in as either a panelist or a moderator? You can't even count them.
I think 6.
6?
Yeah. And three of them were on Thursday morning. Yeah. We did a breakfast briefing for kind of people interested in maritime technology M&A, which was really good. We did that with DSU Beechcroft, and it was a really good mix of people in the room. We had really, really good investors in the room. We had some really interesting technology companies in the room, a few sort of strategic buyers. But my goodness, was I cursing the fact that I made it a breakfast briefing when the alarm went off at 5:30 in the morning on Thursday. And then went straight over to LR and gave a talk on artificial intelligence, one of my sort of pet interest topics. And then I had to run out of the LR building, jump on a line bike, and just make it to the International Shipowning Ship Management Summit, with some panicked phone calls from both you and Sean Maloney on the way that I ignored. But it was all good fun though.
Yeah, I was reassuring him. I said he'll be here, and
because I had pre-warned him that I would 100% be late. If anything, I was 15 minutes early.
But I love the line bike came to your rescue there. There's should we talk about ISSS, International Ship Ownership Management Summit? I really always like this event because it's rare that you get so many of really senior people from ship owners and ship managers together in a room and be able to sort of hear their concerns and the things that are on their priority list. And this was something else, right? The lineup in terms of keynotes. So we had Bjørn Højgaard, CEO of Anglo Eastern. We had Mark O'Neill, CEO of Columbia. We had Sebastian Hardenberg, the CEO of Bernard Schulte, but also president of Intermanager, and Louis Benito, who I hadn't met before, charming man, all giving their sort of keynotes and one hell of a alignment. And then of course René Kolfed Olsen, I think that's how you pronounce his name, the CEO of V Group. So very rare to get all of those guys together in a room and to certainly hear from them. And it wasn't. They didn't all kind of give the same kind of glossy presentation. They all kind of took a slightly different angle and talked about a different aspect. And it was, I don't know whether they recorded it or videoed it, but that was really good. And then there were a number of sort of panel discussions that kicked off from it. So I followed up one that really picked on sort of, whether shipping is doing enough to move in tandem together to solve the challenges. So, it was a combination of different kind of stakeholders from the industry that were talking. And so we kind of tried to kind of zoom in on what more could be done. And one of the takeaways, one of the things that kind of came out was that I think is interesting for this podcast, because we have a lot of technology people, a lot of that sort of stuff, was where some of because vendors are the bottom of the food chain, right? They're the people that everything else happens, and then they're sort of there at the end. I don't want to say like, oh, the poor, will nobody think of the vendors? But I think that vendors or partners, but partners is perhaps is what they want to be, but it's perhaps too broad. Let's call them vendors for now. We've got to understand that if they're going to play their part in the solutions that Chris Wernicke's talking about, those solutions, that's a good example right there. Software solutions, people have got to make that. You've got to maybe consider the vendor's role much earlier on, much further upstream when you're talking about these, because unless there is certainty, the vendors can't come up with the solution, right? They can't get any commitment from the customer. They can't, and there's a risk that the solutions are not there when everybody's done everything. Okay, now we have certainty. Thank you. Let's go. But the vendor then has to go away to kind of make the product. And the companies that are buying that in need to put that into budgets and everything, right? So the discussion was really around how can we kind of get more working groups around this and actually start to involve the vendors in there, get those conversations going about pricing. What would this be worth to you and all that kind of stuff, to get the finance in place to be able to make some of these things. And I thought it was an interesting thing that you don't hear very often, because the thing that strikes me in a very simple illustration, having sort of worked on maritime e-learning solutions for a long time, if you haven't got a standard to work to, and that's not then you can't make it to that standard. You can't then get an approval, which then sets that out, an approval from a flag state for it, if it's part of a piece of legislation like SDCW, or get some sort of recognition, or some sort of stamp from someone who's going to vouch for the quality of that, because they need to be able to look to the standard to be able to sort of approve it or whatever. And that's true of manufacturing as well, with type approvals and all that sort of stuff. So I just think it's worth considering in the mix of all the discussions about how we cooperate, to actually think about taking those vendors in that partnership sort of spirit of that partnership. And to be fair to him, Mark O'Neill's always very sharp on that. He's always talking about working in partnership with people. So so I thought that was an interesting thing to come out of it.
I think that definitely viewing vendors as critical partners and viewing vendors as long-term partners, I think, is something that is genuinely very important to make any real progress. Because as you say, like, all of this stuff costs money to build, all of this stuff takes time, and going down any one particular path creates opportunity cost. It would be very easy as a vendor to do nothing in the short term because of that kind of lack of certainty. But I think if you can position the relationship correctly, and be kind of willing to co-develop with people and be willing to kind of be in it for the long haul, it's an interesting thing. Almost questioning myself, because I'm kind of sitting here thinking, but then you also want to create room for new suppliers to come into the market that creates competition that makes everyone better as well. So it probably goes cuts a bit both ways.
We talked about geopolitics at the start, and geopolitics being a kind of a thread that goes through it. You had Thomas Nordberg give a sort of a keynote speech, which I thought was fantastic, by the way. Well done, Thomas. A very thought-provoking one. And he, unfortunately, again, I didn't know his exact words, so I'm going to mangle them. He kind of talked about geopolitical disruption like this as an opportunity for people to actually differentiate. And he said something about resilience will win over, and that's the bit I didn't write down, Thomas, I'm sorry. But it was that point that, over sort of efficiency or whatever it was he was thinking about. But it was that, and that's something that I think was really an interesting point of view, because that is where you can differentiate, right? In an uncertain world, if you are able to roll with the punches and still deliver, and you have your backups, if you're able to run simulations of what happens if this trade route was to be affected, or this port was no longer an option, to be able to kind of be ready for uncertainty. I thought that was a really interesting take on it.
The kind of main thrust of the talk, as I understood it, was really around how organizations can cooperate and how organizations can use data collaboratively to make decisions in an increasingly uncertain world. And obviously the topic for Thomas was geopolitics, but actually I think you could apply that to many other maritime sectors, or any facet of maritime operations. It is all about making decisions with a high degree of uncertainty. I thought it was a really, really interesting take on it, particularly around taking steps to actually make a genuinely valuable data sharing across organizations possible. Because so much of the discussion that gets had around the industry is sort of about, we should share data better, and it feels like no one ever really makes any traction on it. But what Thomas brought up both in his talk and on the panel was that, where there are very, very clear use cases, very, very clear data sets that could be merged, that you can actually do that very quickly and get benefit from that very, very quickly with a relatively small investment.
Yeah, it was good. And then the other thing that I sort of noted, my kind of take of that was that, and because it then became a theme that other people wanted to talk to me about afterwards, was the question that I posed to your panel that we've discussed on here before, about whether AI is actually going to challenge the whole, let's call it interoperability and the platform kind of, the necessity for the platform kind of play. So there was just to kind of talk about, the panelists kind of made various points around that, how to create that sort of interconnected world, and the sort of the foundational layer of database schemas and stuff. Then there's sort of like, could we come up with a common standard? And then it was like, well, the platform that could be making that interoperability by connecting up all different parts of stakeholders. And my question was like, well, if you just give an AI agent access to the sources of data in lots of different places, isn't that going to be is that going to not negate a lot of what was being talked about? Because it will deal with the exceptions. It will kind of work out that that's not the same thing, inherently. And there wasn't a great deal of time to debate that, but I kind of I felt like I wasn't sort of 100%. They seemed to kind of agree with what I was saying, but as vendors, they've also got to sort of continue to back the sort of, I don't want to call it the older approach, but the traditional, let's say, or the received way that we've been thinking about this problem. Whereas lots of people came up to me afterwards and said, I've been thinking the same thing. Well, I think you were right when you said that. I heard you say this. And I think it's going to be
a good example of that is noon reporting standards, where you end up with doing lots and lots of different noon reporting standards for different chartering interests, for example. I definitely see a world where, and people have been trying to get onto a single noon reporting data standard for years, and it's never really, a few have been published, but never really got traction to the point that it becomes a universal standard. I can absolutely see a world where there is an AI-based middleware layer that takes data from your standard and translates it to data in my standard, and then we never have to bother with the standards question again. I know of a few companies who've kind of gone in that direction. I don't think anyone's ever, my knowledge at least, I don't think anyone's applied that to known reporting yet. But that it feels like a very obvious thing that someone should be shooting for.
Another thing I would say, like, background sort of dark hum. Let's call it a dark hum in the background. The dark hum of fragmentation, right? That was something that came across a number of different times. We have had the luxury in shipping for a very long time of working to globally agreed standards. And I've made this point on my panel yesterday. There is no such thing, because people may not understand how it works, right? At the government level, there is no such thing as international regulation. It doesn't happen. There's no such thing as international law, really. It's locally agreed, or it's sort of internationally agreed, but locally
applied,
right? So and that's what we've enjoyed. And a business like Videotel, for example, that I came from, was able to make a suite of products that could be sold everywhere. So you've got that incredible kind of, you're making an investment with a very big market that you can then take that product to.
Yeah.
Because everyone is working to the same standards. We never went into ports, right? For a good reason, because they came under the local for every country. So we have to slightly modify it. And as soon as you do that, you're getting costs. You're not getting that economy of scale.
Yeah.
That's one tiny, tiny little sort of illustration of it. When you then extrapolate that and what that would mean for all sorts of much more complicated things, then you can start to see the issues. And I think one of the things there is decarbonisation, right? We are living in Europe. Europe is one of the areas making legislation that are keen to put in market-based measures and stuff. Shipping is global, and there are parts of the world that don't operate to those standards and don't intend to, So trying to get those people to go along with it, when there's some of the costs that we've talked about earlier included, there is a danger that people start to say, well, actually, look, I don't need to do that. I'm not going to do that, and that routes change. And Sebastian von Hardenberg gave a very good illustration of the law of the second order of, the unintended consequences of some of this legislation. And one of those is, because of Brexit, Britain is outside of the sort of EU
ETS.
Yes. So he's saying, I don't think they intended that cargo would go across the, the world to UK and then go to Europe on trucks.
Yeah.
That wasn't the intention, but that's one of the consequences that could happen. And this is the problem with the fragmentation side of it, and what that's going to mean in terms of, and also when we talk about the market-based measures that are inherent in what's coming out of MEPC, and what that big vote will be on in October, I think it is, isn't it? To ratify what was agreed in principle earlier. you've got like different levels of standards in the EU. Will they then drop those and be happy to go with the IMO one, or are ship managers going to have to worry about two of those things, or a top up? Or you start to see the enormous complexity of it. So there was that sort of like that fear that that geopolitics and the consequences of protectionism in different countries leading to a defragmentation of legislation. But then the other big elephant in the room, part of the harm, I guess, but the elephant is what happens if that doesn't get through in October, if what was agreed in principle doesn't then go through in October. And do we have a plan B? Because the one thing everybody wants right now, whether they like it or not, whether they would have liked it to work a different way, the one thing everybody really, really wants and needs is certainty. And if we don't get that vote through, we don't have that.
The Secretary General of the IMO popped up at various points through my week. I saw him speak at 2 or 3 things. And one thing that I do admire about Arsenio is the complete conviction he has about MEPC in October. He has zero doubt about what the outcome will be. Obviously, time will tell if he's right or not. But I genuinely, I was quite pleased to see such high conviction leadership coming from the IMO at LISW. And I think that comes back to your point around certainty. I think he is trying to give a level of certainty in what is an otherwise potentially quite uncertain world, and with a very, very critical vote coming up in a few weeks' time. He's working very, very hard to provide that certainty to industry, so that industry can galvanize around it. And that, I think, probably ultimately increases the likelihood of a vote passing as well. So it's a sort of virtuous circle. I personally fully back his take, and I fully back what MEPC is trying to do. And I really genuinely do hope it passes. I think one factor in favor of MEPC passing is that we are now getting to the point where the reality of EU ETS, which is the European Union emissions trading scheme, is starting to bite. And, you know, that all the kind of payments on account are starting to come due. So like it's genuinely, there is cash on the table in a way that it just has until very recently, or really up until now, it's all been quite theoretical. And now suddenly people are starting to be charged. Now, you're right about the kind of second order consequences. Tangier, I think, is becoming a major Mediterranean hub because it's not in the EU, but it is in the Mediterranean. And so, you know, you can ship stuff to Tangier and then you can have local feeders come and pick it up, and you avoid the emissions trading scheme. But I think the fact that that scheme exists and the fact that people are now starting to pay into that scheme means that it has created an unequal playing field that I think industry at large would like to equalize, with some exceptions. That's why I'm genuinely will be watching with fascination. It's why I'm so pleased to have seen, as I say, such kind of high conviction from the Secretary General.
Yeah, I had a chat with him last night actually, and you know, I'm a big fan, and I think he's done a fantastic job, and yeah, I agree. I mean, he's in a private conversation exactly as he is in the public one.
Yeah.
And I think he's optimistic, and we wish him really, really well. I think we desperately need to get some certainty on this, and it's going to be interesting, you know, to see how we can get whether that consensus stays strong that we saw earlier in the year, because there were a few people obviously that were not, and has lobbying happened since then? I would imagine so. You know, it's going to be tough, and the other thing to bear in mind, of course, is that with these additional costs that are going to come are going to go to the consumer fundamentally, right? So again, we don't want to be in a situation where consumers where that needs to be evenly spread, right? Otherwise it's going to cause further political problems and further political reaction and stuff like that. So yeah. What's that old curse? May you live in interesting times.
On the subject of interesting times, I'm spending the next few weeks on airplanes of various description. So I think we're going to end up slotting in a few of our very interesting interviews over the next, probably over the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Should we talk a little bit about who's on the line?
I think we can. Yeah, why not? Did we not? I thought we already had, but we probably didn't. So let's do it.
I think we've teased it a lot, but we haven't actually mentioned any names.
Yeah.
Apart from
who's in the can,
you mentioned earlier.
Who's in the can, and maybe we should also talk a little bit around what we can expect, what the listeners can expect to hear.
we've got, I think there's 4 that or 5 actually. Have we done 5? Don't want to miss someone. So you mentioned Bjorn from Anglo Eastern earlier, that we sat down with him during Shipping Week. That was our first in-person recording. And that was what I expected it to be, a conversation about maritime. It was sort of ended up almost more of a conversation on philosophy, philosophy and leadership. And that was a genuinely very, very fascinating conversation, which we were, I think it's fair to say, fairly nervous about, because we had no idea if any of the tech was going to work. Having never recorded in person.
Well, yeah, that didn't help. It didn't help. You mentioned earlier that the Trump visit. You were in where were you? You were just by Cannon Street, weren't you? I was at the IMO. So I thought, I know what I'll do. Rather than go to Vauxhall, as a much easier route from Westminster, what could possibly go wrong? So I kind of, and with my giant suitcase of equipment that we needed to do the recording,
I
started hot-footing across, hit like more police than you've ever seen in your life, and I was lucky really that I think I could have been completely banjaxed, but yeah. So we got there, and I was very hot and sweaty, and put it together. It was a bit fly by the seat of the pants, but I mean, it was really good. I think that the philosophical, 100% agree with you on there. I think there's people are going to really enjoy it, because I think it's really different. It's a really different conversation, but it's got some really practical things in there. There's some really, around how he has approached things, what he's learned from some of the experiences there, and a fascinating career from being on ships and going through coming ashore as manager, and and clearly he's achieved an enormous amount. So listening to the tips that he does to put himself into the right frame of mind to do what he's doing, I think is a really interesting one. I was delighted with how it went, and as well, like a lot of the people that we have interviewed, either you or I knows them well, right?
Yeah.
And I've met him maybe twice. So I didn't really know what to expect, and what we got was he was a really great guy, and really generous with both his time and his perspectives. So thank you once again, Bjorn. And so that's one to really look forward to. Who else?
We interviewed Bill Doby, the CEO of Sedna, which also a fascinating interview. No, yeah. I think that one will probably appeal much more to the kind of aspiring entrepreneurs in the audience. Anyone who wants to start a company, there's some really, really interesting advice in there about what to do and what not to do. And also, I think anyone who is interested in artificial intelligence and the potential impact of artificial intelligence in the maritime industry. Bill is someone who is living that through the products at Sedna. They are very much building to become an AI company. So we kind of got into the weeds on some of the bigger impact that might have on the maritime sector. And then we had Torsten Pedersen. So Torsten is the chief operating officer of Seaspan, who are the world's largest independent provider of container ship tonnage. They've got a big fleet, and they own the fleet and operate the fleet themselves. So they do all the technical management, all the crewing, as well as being the tonnage owner. And that one was really focused around kind of business transformation and how to make business transformation work, and what are the things you need to be thinking about if you go into an organization with a view of changing how it operates for the better, and what are some of the bear traps you can fall into if you go in without a bit of humility, I guess.
Yeah, and again, both Bill and Torsten very generous and open in the discussion, which was really good. I thought again, I think there's lots in there for people aspiring to lead companies and lead change in companies, and around how you sort of approach that. And they're both sort of quite open about things that perhaps they'd learned from that hadn't gone so well in the past, and stuff like that. I thought there's also some interesting things in Seaspan about how they work with partners, what they choose to do in house, and how they work with some of their partners as well. So I really enjoyed both those conversations enormously. Yeah, really good. Manish Singh also was somebody that we saw. Manish last night, didn't we, at the gala dinner as well? And I think you were on a panel together as well.
Yeah, he very graciously joined our breakfast briefing. Was one of the people cursing me for making it a breakfast briefing. But despite the time in the morning, he was very, very insightful on the panel and in the interview we did.
Yeah, and that one clearly. I mean, that again, I think all of them we've captured people's kind of journey and how they got to where they were. Manish is obviously an interesting kind of arc, but then most of that was, well, there's a lot in there for people who are interested in the M&A space and interested about value creation and all that sort of stuff. There's lots and lots of good things in there that we covered.
And then finally, we have Heather Combs, who's the CEO of Ripple Operations, which is a PE-backed roll-up of technology businesses in the crew training space. And given your background, I think the two of you had a lot to talk about. But one of the things that interests me about Heather is that she is not from a maritime background at all. This is her first leadership role in the maritime industry, but she brings a lot of really interesting and exciting tech thinking into the shipping industry, and it's really interesting to hear that kind of fresh thinking.
Yeah, that was really good conversation, and because you sort of done bits and pieces of work with her, so you knew her. I didn't know her, and I didn't really know anything about Ripple, to be honest, and so it was interesting. And I think what was interesting is that you said they're putting businesses together in. You said maritime training. I would put them more in that sort of human capital management piece because they were. Right, the crewing aspect to what they're doing, and coming at it from a lot of the businesses there have quite a big footprint in the cruise industry. So that was sort of a slight differential as well from my experience, where we were sort of coming from the cargo space and sort of trying to do more actually in the cruise sector. And and I think it was sort of some of the things we talked about in there is about like how do you actually put sort of companies together, and from a brand perspective, how do you kind of get people to understand working with some of these historic brands into sort of creating something new. And so I think there's probably some stuff in there for people who are interested in brand and marketing sort of angles as well. So, but again, very good, interesting story there. And again, it was a very good open, discussion. So lots to look forward to, you lot.
Indeed. I think that's probably
more recordings to come as well. We are lining up some other people, and we'd love to know who you would really like to hear from as well. That's the other thing.
Awesome. You got anything else?
I think that's all we've got time for, isn't it?
I think it's more than all we've got time for.
Yeah, time to lie down.
We're going to cut.
Time to lie down with a cold towel on our heads.
Yeah, exactly.
Recover from London International Shipping Week. I'm looking forward to the next one already.
Me too. 2 years to go. Thanks, Raal. Have a wonderful weekend.
Yeah,
see you soon.
You too. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.